TV.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of Newsmakers. I'm your host, Jess Brady. Newsmakers is about having in-depth discussions about hot topics in London. Right now, there are few topics quite as hot as the upcoming provincial election. Ontarians head to the polls on June 7th to see if the Liberals will hold on to power another term or whether residents will vote for change. As the campaign picks up steam, we're going to look at the biggest issues impacting Londoners. To do that, we've assembled a panel of esteemed guests who will share their perspectives on the hot-button issues of the campaign. Kelly Elliott is the Ward 1 councillor in Temps Centre and frequent contributor to the Roundtable on 980 CFPL. Peter Bergmanis is the co-chair of the London Health Coalition. And last but certainly not least, we're joined by Ward 4 councillor in the City of London, Jessie Helmer. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
So right off the top, we just want to mention, in the spirit of transparency, that Councillor Helmer is also the partner of London North Centre Liberal candidate Kate Graham. He's here today to share his own thoughts and his observations as a member of council within London. So people across the province are talking about the campaign. Things have been especially interesting for months now, really, especially with the emergence of Doug Ford as the new pilot of the Conservative Party. Do you think that the drama is distracting from the campaign? All the things that have gone on. We have, the gas plant verdict and the trial in general. David Livingston was just sentenced, I believe, to 4 months in custody for his role in that and his conviction. Anybody wants to jump in on this one? It's kind of an open question. Are we focused on the issues right now, or are we still kind of caught up in the mix of things and the extracurricular activities, if you will, of a campaign?
I don't think those stories really are jumping out and distracting anyone yet to the campaign. The Conservatives haven't really jumped on the David Livingstone bus yet and taking that against the Liberals, but I think it's still early on enough in the campaign that things are just picking up steam that we're going to start seeing it soon.
Okay. Anybody
and
else?
I have to concur that the serious issues are still yet to be discussed. And what Mr. Ford's leadership is going to be like is probably of a great concern to most Ontarians, because he appears that he could be poised to form another government.
It's true. Jessie?
I'd say, it tends to pick up in intensity, the kind of differences in policy once all the platforms are out, and not all the platforms are really out yet. And I think people are going to start digging in and asking questions about those platforms once they know what they are.
It's true, because right now we're kind of in the drips and drabs portion of the campaign. It's early on. We're just over a month away, and from Election Day, I should say. And so it's an excellent point that, we're still looking for details on a lot of things. Some items aren't costed yet. A lot of interesting promises and, election ideas, but sometimes it's a little bit short on details yet. Maybe this is just my perspective because I'm reading about the campaign every single day at work, and I work in the news at 980 CFPL. Does anyone feel like this campaign has been going on for quite a while? Is it because of everything that went on over the winter with Patrick Brown and the Progressive Conservatives, his resignation and the ensuing scandal there? Is it just one of those things that this always seems to happen? I don't know. I feel like it's been going on for a while.
I don't think the campaign has been going on that long. It's the stories that have been coming out leading up to the campaign. Obviously, the Patrick Brown scandal was a kickoff to who would form in the next government. Everyone was kind of poised to the fact that the Conservatives had a great chance to take over with Patrick Brown, and then once that came out, all of a sudden that threw everything out in the air. And so the campaign didn't necessarily start early, but the talks of when the campaign was going to start did.
Yeah.
I would say that it's probably part of a symptom of perpetual election cycles, which we've seen for the past decade or so, and that's around the world. Anywhere this social media has now become the primary way of people getting their information, and so it has become a constant in our lives. The news feed is 24 hours, and that's where the cycle is coming from.
True, and I guess it doesn't help that we also have a municipal election coming up in the fall, so we have politics on the brain. I know that a lot of people that I know, other colleagues, are super excited for this year. Like from December, they're like, yes, it's going to be an amazing year for politics. And certainly, but I wonder if people kind of get a little bit fatigued even just thinking of the prospect of so many campaigns. Does anybody else feel that way? You think, oh God?
I would say, you know, I think Peter is right that there is an element of kind of perpetual campaigning. You know, the Conservatives initially, you know, they had the policy convention, they came out with the People's Guarantee, and they were starting to push that pretty hard. And that was pretty far in advance of the actual election. Now that we have fixed election dates, everyone kind of knew what the election date would be. But then there was a bit of a reset when, you know, the People's Guarantee, well, not so much anymore, and now there's going to be a new platform. So, you know, I think they were out the gate pretty early, especially if you look back in Ontario campaigns in the past. I think that was significantly early. But it kind of reset once it was kind of up in the air what their actual platform was, and now it's starting to come out now. So.
Well, I think let's dive into the first meaty topic that I wanted to get to in terms of the local London and region area, things that are, you know, on people's minds, what they're talking about, healthcare. I feel like that has been a massive story, so many different stories within that overarching theme within the last couple of months. You know, it's a topic that impacts almost everybody. I mean, whether you yourself are using healthcare services, you know someone who is, if you aren't, that sort of a thing. Peter, to start with you, given your work with the London Health Coalition, you see firsthand how healthcare works in this city. You know, how would you characterize the state of healthcare right now?
Crisis. If you want to have a simple word for it, it'd be crisis. We have been in a perpetual state of overcrowding for easily the last couple of years in this city. And to give you a rough idea of what that means, it's, for instance, the largest facility here is London Health Sciences Centre. And it's more of a reporting of when it's not over 100% capacity. Not uncommon to be on a weekly basis anywhere from 105 to 120% over capacity. From inside reports that I'm aware of, it's been all the way up to 177%. That's incorporating, of course, the mental health patients that have come to their doors. To see that is rather astronomical. We're probably the most overcrowded hospital in the province, if not the country.
Wow, I mean, that's a stark assessment, and I think that it, you know, living in Canada and Ontario, as fortunate as we are to have access to so many resources, I think it takes us by surprise when we hear of these stories of people waiting in hallways and not being able to access crucial healthcare. Jesse, when you hear stories, have you heard from your constituents about some of their concerns? I know that obviously healthcare is not the dominion of a municipal council, but you're very connected. I mean, what do people tell you?
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that because I'm actually on a health task force with the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and that's a relatively new task force for AMO. And we spend a lot of time talking about various aspects of healthcare when we meet. We're talking about emergency services, you know, EMS and ambulance response. We're talking about the burden that police are picking up when there's not another source of response. We're talking about mental health and its impacts on a variety of municipally delivered services. We're talking about public health and the impacts or not of how that's delivered in the community. So, you know, despite the fact that, you know, hospitals are not a municipal responsibility, even when it comes to hospitals, we're talking about where are they going to be located, where are new hospitals going to be opened, how is that going to happen, and how are hospitals going to be closed or amalgamated. These are all significant concerns for municipalities. And so it does come up pretty regularly. You know, the issues around overcrowding at LHSC, I don't hear a lot about that a lot directly, but you do hear about people's interactions with mental health. When the new 24/7 crisis center opened on Huron Street, which is in my ward, you know, we had to go through a zoning process to make that happen. As soon as it opened, it was basically at capacity. Yeah. You know, so there have been some things happening. I think everyone recognizes that there's huge challenges, not just in the hospital setting, but all throughout the healthcare system. Even in public health, there's some very significant challenges.
It's true. It seems like overwhelming sometimes because, you know, when you mention that crisis center, it's like it opened and then capacity. So it's like, holy, it's like one step forward, and then you still feel like you're kind of behind the 8 ball and trying to keep up with demand. Kelly, from your perspective out in Thames Centre, from the counties, what sort of perhaps unique challenges are people facing out there? What do you see for them?
Well, obviously we don't have main access to healthcare in rural areas. So we often come to urban areas and come into London. Peter and I were having a discussion before that we're fortunate enough to have smaller hospitals in some of our smaller towns. And so in Thames Centre, a lot of my residents will frequent the St. Mary's Hospital or the hospital in Ingersoll or Woodstock. We see shorter wait times there, and they're easy to access, easy to see a physician. But then the only problem you run into there is if you need imagery or blood work and it's not between 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, all of a sudden you don't have access to that. And so when it's a serious emergency or something that you need a little bit more, it's coming into London and waiting at the hospital there. But then we look at things like retention of family doctors. So we're fortunate enough in Thorndale and Dorchester and Thames Centre to have a couple family doctors in each, but we have to look at retaining them and keeping them in rural areas. There's not very many family doctors that want to practice in smaller communities, and so that's a huge issue for us in the county. And just accessing public health and things like that is always coming into the urban areas to access that.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like I've talked to a couple of people who have family out in St. Mary's area, in different areas around the county, and I've heard of specialists who kind of rotate between hospitals.
Yeah.
And so they're not always stationed at one place. Maybe at 10 o'clock at night, they're out in St. Mary's or in Stratford or, and then the next couple of hours they're somewhere else. And so I would imagine that that would be not only frustrating for patients and their families, but also for those physicians who don't really have a stable 9 to 5. I mean, in that profession, you probably don't anyway. But having a home base and always being at that facility would probably be more like enviable for other, they would prefer to have that.
Right. And the special thing in St. Mary's Hospital is it's attached to the family center there, and the family doctors that work in the family center rotate in the emergency department. And so sometimes you'll see, it depends when you go in, there's always a rotation of doctors, so you never know who's going to be in there. So the follow-up is hard too, especially when you all of a sudden have to request to get an x-ray or things like that, and you have to go into London to get it and then get that follow-up is sometimes difficult.
Certainly. And then, it's hard because if you feel like if there are enough issues like that, not even just for doctors and retention, but you might have people moving away from those rural communities to other areas where they feel like they have better access. And then that leads to a whole domino effect of other problems for the community, the home community that's then losing people.
Exactly.
And then I guess if you say they move to London, then it's like, oh, we're seeing an influx of people and it, impacts our services. So it's a bit of a domino effect, isn't it?
Well, back to your point about the mental health, it has not been just one step forward. It's been a long retreat, quite frankly. You have to look back for what we had a generation ago to what we have now, and it is unbelievably disappointing. Think about this. We, within the last 5 years, lost London Psychiatric Hospital. That facility had hundreds of beds. St. Thomas Psychiatric, same, hundreds of beds. 80% of our mental health beds, inpatient beds, gone from a generation ago. And a small walk-in clinic, crisis center, was supposed to take up that slack. It's no big surprise it took 24 hours for that to be full. And of course, we have our issues at Elgin, what am I looking for? The
detention center?
Detention center.
Yeah, EMDC.
Because we're criminalizing a lot of people with mental health issues. And you don't have to go far in the city, downtown, the Four Corners at Dundas and Richmond. You see everyone that is down on their luck, the people that are having the hardest time, the most marginalized, right there. And so many of them probably just need a little mental health. And we're not providing enough of that. And the way we keep slashing and burning the system, there's no way we could.
I feel like it's so tricky because when you want to make a change and you want to add some funding or what have you, it just seems like, a drop in the bucket. So you try, like we've been saying, one step forward. But even if, say, the Liberals do not win the election and it's the Progressive Conservatives that come in, or it's the NDP, maybe they win. I just feel like no amount almost no amount of immediate cash infusion is going to fix everything. So it is a bit overwhelming, and it almost feels like, well, how on earth do you begin from such a point where we're at, where it's seemingly like such a crisis, as you said, Peter. And I don't know if there's a real answer to that except steady progress, and which can sometimes be very painstaking and slow going. One thing that I did want to touch on, because we are going to go to a break, but I wanted to get to this since we're really in the healthcare theme, was to go to you, Jesse, and talk about the supervised consumption sites, because we have our temporary location on King Street. We are moving towards finding a permanent location. There have been some bumps in the road along that process, but it's an ongoing developing situation. We know that the Liberal government has said that they're going to invest more than, I think, $222 million over 3 years for supports and more beds and healthcare professionals. Doug Ford, leader of the Progressive Conservatives, said in a statement last week that he does not support supervised consumption sites, but he understands the need for them and the, quote, I believe he said, small epidemic, which that seems perhaps counterintuitive, small epidemic, I don't know. But I don't know, like for a community like London, which is trying to move forward with facilities of that nature, is that a little scary for us to think that perhaps there's a really good shot that a new premier would come in and maybe not be on board with it? Bit of a wishy-washy message from him, back and forth.
Well, I wish it was wishy-washy, that would be better. You know, the truth is we have a very serious problem in London, both in terms of HIV infection rates, hepatitis C, infective endocarditis, which is an inflammation of the heart valves, and a variety of other diseases, some of which will kill you very quickly and some of which will just shorten your life dramatically, especially if people are not adhering to treatment and they're not in treatment. And that's what we're seeing. We have thousands of injection drug users in London. Many of them are in stable housing and they're middle income people or they're higher income people. Their health is not so bad, but we've got a lot of injection drug users who are on the street. They're not adhering to treatment. They have infections that they don't necessarily even know about, and that is having huge detrimental impacts on their health. So we have people overdosing and dying, which is one problem, but then we have all these other issues around infectious diseases, and it's a huge issue. And Doug Ford really needs to learn about what's actually going on in London before he talks about what he thinks we should be doing or not doing, because supervised consumption is one thing we need to be doing. There's a lot of things that need to happen. That's just one of them. You know, we need to get more people into treatment programs. In the meantime, we have to keep them alive so that they can get into those programs when they're ready to do that. Supervised consumption is proven to help keep people alive. How it gets delivered is really important. We have to actually properly resource it and do it properly. But it's definitely something we need to be doing in London. We have a very significant problem here.
Okay, well, I think that's a good time to take our very first break. We will be right back after this.
I think we need the support of all of the different communities in London, and just maybe taking more public forums and getting the opinions of the citizens before actually creating a plan at government level.
Have you ever questioned the nature of your reality? Do you ever wonder about your actions? The price you'd have to pay if there was a reckoning? That reckoning is here. You're in my dream.
The next chapter in Ontario's future will be decided June 7th. Before you head to the ballot box, get to know the people running to represent you at Queen's Park. Watch the local campaign as candidates debate the issues affecting your community. And on election night, you'll find comprehensive coverage of your riding on the local results. Rogers TV puts the local focus on the provincial election.
This season on Vintage Nights.
Domi, hat-trick, 4-2, London leads it.
It's exciting to be here. Exciting to see my name up there.
To Maroon, scores! What a tic-tac-toe play that was. And Maroon completes the hat trick. Robert Thomas! Shot! Scores!
Welcome back to Newsmakers. We are In the midst of a very special edition of the program, I'm joined by a panel of esteemed colleagues here in the community in the London area, and we are talking about the provincial election, but with a local twist. So the issues that are hot here in London, things that residents will be thinking about very carefully as they go to the polls on June 7th to vote in the provincial election. It will determine who they tick a box for as they cast their ballots. So we talked about healthcare in the community before the break. And coming back, I'd like to talk about another big topic in the news. I feel like there have been like a few, and obviously we're going to get to those, the ones that are really making headlines. One of the biggest, BRT, bus rapid transit, for anyone who's been living under a rock potentially, not listening in or reading much what's going on in the local scene at City Hall. Bus rapid transit, big debates over the future of transportation in the city and accessibility, helping people get around to where they need to be. It's a $500 million plan. We've got a big vote coming up in the next little while on a draft environmental report on it. You know, we've seen obviously support from 3 out of 3 levels of government. The province has committed to, I think, $270 million. And, you know, London is obviously chipping in its share, as is the province. There have been debates over the local plan. It's divisive, as is you know, anything would be for something this large. Usually you have people on both sides. People have said that they'd like to see changes to the plan. The Liberal funding at the provincial level does not allow for that. That money is contingent upon that plan going forward as is. Doug Ford, interestingly enough, with the Progressive Conservatives, has said, your money is going to stay your money, but you can change it if you need to. Does that appeal to anyone around this table, making modifications to the plan that's, you know, pretty like far down the garden path right now? Anybody?
Oh, well, let me jump in.
Go.
You know, I think it's it could be a popular thing to say to people during an election. You know, you don't like this plan, vote for me, and you can get something different. I think it's not a very good way of actually delivering transit in the province. These things take a long time to plan. Municipal councils have to do all kinds of work to get the plans to the point where they're ready to apply for funding. And to have the idea that the Premier of the province is going to, he actually said about Hamilton that he was going to do a phone poll of people to see if they wanted it or not, right? So forget what the elected municipal council is deciding. I'm just going to go around the municipal council and I'm just going to do a direct poll. Yeah. You cannot govern the province of Ontario like that. And every municipal council should be very concerned that that's how he's thinking. I honestly think if Rob Ford was the mayor of Toronto and Doug Ford was on the council in Toronto and the Premier of Ontario tried to do a phone poll to go around their plans for a Scarborough subway, they would lose their minds, you know. But that's what he's saying he wants to do in Hamilton. Thankfully, Andrea Horwath is not saying that. Kathleen Wynne is not saying that. And what they say is basically, you know, it's up to municipal council to put forward your infrastructure projects. We'll look at them, and if they make sense, we'll fund them. Right? And I think that should be the approach that the government takes, whether it's a Conservative government or a Liberal government or an NDP government.
Yeah. Kelly, do you have any thoughts on, I guess, you know, how BRT has rolled out so far? We can talk about generally the plan if you have thoughts on that, and specifically how it'll, you know, play into futures. And this election is pivotal in some ways, because if you are of the mind that electing a Conservative government could really change the face of the plan moving forward, and, you know, that's something you might want to consider. You know, what are your thoughts in general on it?
Well, I think every municipal government, like Jesse said, is responsible for the planning. We know our communities best. We're elected to serve those communities. It's up to us to make those decisions. And like Jesse said, having a premier that goes around the decisions that we've made is definitely irresponsible and takes away our job and what we were elected to do. For the BRT plan, no offense to Londoners, no offense to Jesse, it doesn't affect me. That's not the infrastructure that's important to me in Thames Centre and the investments that I want to make for my constituents. But a regional transportation plan is important to London. There's no doubt about it. And however BRT rolls out, it has to be a plan that serves Londoners properly, and it's the municipal government that needs to make those decisions.
Now, I don't know if you saw my sheet, because I have some notes on here, you know, do a little prep work. But, you know, very excellent point that, you know, our BRT plan doesn't really have a lot of impact on Thames Centre and your Ward 1. But what would you like to see then done in terms of investment in infrastructure and transportation for your area or the region?
So investments in infrastructure and transportation are my roads. I don't have any big transit plans. I don't have any rail or anything big like that, or buses. Monorail. My gravel roads and my county roads are what get me through. And so, yeah, we rely on the gas tax, and really that's the source of funding that we have, and property taxes to fund the maintenance of our roads, and that's my investments to transportation.
And it's funny, we know when you were saying that, and also Jessie, talking about the idea of kind of circumventing municipal councils and regional governments. The phrase "stay in your lane" kind of comes to mind, where it's like, make sure that you're handling issues in your realm, because yeah, if you start kind of crossing lines like that, you do get into tricky territory. And I mean, you would like to think that everyone has everyone's best interest in heart, in mind, doing that sort of thing, but it could lead to some problems, certainly. Peter, any thoughts on the idea of some wiggle room on the BRT plan? How do you feel about it in general?
Well, I like that my colleagues brought up the governance aspect of this, because yes, it is a municipal run situation, and they deserve to have the #1 priority decision to make there. False referenda don't really deliver democratic results. We know they can be jerry-rigged in a way that you can make the answer be any way you want it to play out. As a healthcare person, I mean, I of course support a public transit system that's robust. It should be. More people getting out of their vehicles, all the better for all of our health. And, yeah, the governance has to be done on a local level, just like we want our hospital boards to be elected. We want decisions affecting our health and transit to be made right here at our local level.
For sure, and I know this is a bit of a departure, obviously, from BRT-specific talk, but Jessie, when you were talking about the phone call polls, and when you mentioned Rob Ford, he was very well known for calling up his constituents, like they would email him with an issue, and he would like legit call them, which really is an everyman appeal in that way. People really tapped into that and they connected with it. So this is, a different avenue and perhaps a little bit more broad. But I think that's probably one of Doug's strengths, is that he kind of says what a lot of people are probably thinking, even though it sometimes doesn't take into account complexities of, say, a BRT system and making those decisions and why you chose option A over option B. Do you think that that's going to connect on like a wide level? Anybody have any thoughts on that with Londoners or anything?
I think Doug Ford's style of politics is to tell people what they want to hear. There's a lot of people who are angry about a variety of things in the province of Ontario, and he definitely is appealing to that, right? They're frustrated by things that they don't like, and he's being very simple and clear with them about how he's going to address that anger, right? I think people need to go beyond that and say, okay, well, how? You know? He talked about hydro, and he said, I'm going to go fire everybody. Well, I can tell you what that'll do. It'll mean you'll pay everybody a bunch of severance, which costs money. And then what? Then you hire new people, and you pay them basically the same amount of money that the other people are making. And how much further ahead are you? Like, that doesn't really solve any of the actual problems with hydro. That just sounds good. And it's appealing to the anger that people have out there.
It's easy in any election, whether it be provincial, municipal, or federal, to come out and say, I promise I'm going to do this. It's easy to make those promises and say those things, but getting in there and making a plan and costing out a plan is totally different. And Jessie's right in the fact that people really need to take a look at what they're promising. I mean, the Conservatives said they'd get rid of the carbon tax, which was in the People's Guarantee that funded all of Patrick Brown's promises. But now when you're still making Patrick Brown's promises without that carbon tax, all of a sudden, how are you paying for that? What are you cutting in order to pay for that? And that's what people really need to look at. And that's why it's important to look at the costed platforms on how it's going to get delivered. Because it's easy to make promises, it's hard to deliver them.
That is true. Quickly, before we head to another break, in our discussions before this episode, and we were kind of arranging who was going to be on the show, Jesse, you and I mentioned, well, you mentioned LRT, light rail transit, and we recently had a recommitment, if you will, from the province for funding and some more timelines on when we can expect to see that service established for it's the Windsor-Toronto corridor. You know, the idea of having a London to Toronto or Pearson Airport train in like about just over an hour. I think it was like 73 minutes, something like that. That's obviously very appealing. What would that do for London to have LRT established, and how would that really help us out here?
Yeah, I think you mean the high-speed rail, right?
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
And it would be rail.
Yeah.
You know, that would be transformational for London, that's for sure. We're talking about being able to travel from downtown London to downtown Kitchener in 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Right? I can't get from Byron to the airport in 25 minutes driving a car, right? And so that is a very big difference for London. And then from London to Guelph is something like 34 minutes. From London to Pearson Airport, 57 minutes. From London to downtown Toronto, 73 minutes. So that is very fast. And I think it would transform the real estate market in London. It would change the growth rate in terms of population in London. As someone who worked in Toronto for 5 years and lived in London and took VIA back and forth like 650 times, I can tell you the existing system doesn't work very well. It's not very reliable and it's not fast. And the difference between being 73 minutes from Toronto, if you look at the growth rate of people who are 73 minutes away from Union Station right now by car, their growth rates have been a lot higher than London's for several decades. And I think if you think about what would it be like if you were that close to this major economic engine in Toronto, I think that's really a transformational thing for London. So they're really just in the planning stages for it now. They're talking about building a new rail corridor, which comes with a lot of impacts. And so, you know, we have to see what the environmental assessment comes back with. But I think it's encouraging that they put money into the budget for it.
Certainly. Well, I think that's a good point to take our second break, and we will be right back after this.
I could care less realistically if it's conservative or liberal. I'm more concerned about just making Canada better for everybody. And right now it seems like a lot is happening for social issues, which is good, but at the same time, there needs to be jobs, and people need, like, if we want to bring in refugees and bring in people that are suffering, we still need something for them to do. We can't just take people on and then not have jobs for them. So we need to have a very strong manufacturing sector, and then at the same time, it also will help with social programs and things like that.
Economic uncertainty, I think, the idea that the economy needs to improve, there needs to be better jobs, more stability.
Hundreds of officers from services across the province gather to honor the 266 fallen officers whose names are engraved on the Wall of Remembrance. Watch the Ontario Police Memorial Foundation Ceremony of Remembrance on Rogers TV.
Ready to get swept off your feet? Come downtown and join Salsa Wednesdays.
Wednesday night salsa happens at Oliver Twist downtown, right at the market. We learn salsa, merengue, bachata are the ones that we really teach. Every now and then we switch it up and incorporate kizomba. Everyone is very friendly. You don't have to worry about no judgment here. Everyone's just looking to dance and have fun. If you think you have two left feet, you should come either way, because our lesson is directed towards beginners. That way we can introduce you to dancing. It's the best Wednesday night out there, I believe. And also, you get to learn a little bit more about our culture, the music, and you get to dance. Who doesn't like dancing?
So put your best foot forward and dance the night away. And here's what else is going on in London. And that's what's up, London.
Welcome back to Newsmakers. So we've talked about healthcare in London. We've talked about BRT, the possibility of high-speed rail, not to be confused with LRT. And now we are going to move on to the economy and issues surrounding a couple of hot-button issues that have obviously made headlines because we're talking about them. First item would be minimum wage increase. January 1st, the government increased minimum wage to $14 an hour. The plan currently is to bump it up again on January 1st, 2019 to $15 an hour. We've heard in the news, we've seen people who are very happy with that increase say that it's long overdue. Others, like business owners predominantly, are saying they're not quite sure how they're going to deal with that. It's going to be a bit of a setback for them, and they're going to need to do some number crunching to make it work. Jesse, speaking at the local level, have any businesses reached out to you? What are you hearing from them, and how are they dealing with it?
Yeah, usually when businesses contact me, it's about something to do with their property taxes, but I have heard from some people who found the change, because it's gone up so quickly to $14, that was a lot to take in at once. And that's a pretty common refrain. Businesses have handled it differently, right? Some people have had to raise the prices of the things that they're selling to be able to pay their staff more. Sometimes they've had to cut hours and change how they're staffing so that they can redistribute the payroll more effectively. Businesses have responded differently. In my ward, though, there's a lot of people in my ward who are not earning a huge amount of money, and I think the estimates are that about 20,000 people in London were earning more money after minimum wage increase came in, and a lot of those people live in my ward. So as much as there's pressure on businesses, there's also some benefits for the people who are earning $11 and something an hour, and now they're making 14. So that's a big difference for somebody who you make an extra $2 an hour. That's a big increase.
Certainly, and I guess also there's the argument to be made that if people have more disposable income, they can then turn around and go and support local businesses some more. So you would hope that we would see that domino effect. Kelly, out in Thames Centre, are people talking about minimum wage? Is it really an issue there?
You know, and it's funny, it's not an issue that I actually take phone calls on. To be honest, high-speed rail and yes. Broadband internet and things like that are kind of the bigger issues that I take on. And so minimum wage hasn't been a frequent conversation that we've been having. I know in, obviously, my ward and Thames Centre is agricultural dominant, and I read a lot of agricultural magazines and things like that, and I've seen a lot of articles about how farmers and the impact to farmers. Obviously, they have a lot of helping hands, and they hire a lot of people in the fields and processing and things like that, and it's an impact. But as for Thames Centre, it hasn't been a concern that's come up.
Yeah, and that's the nature of the business that's done out there, the local economy, for certain. Peter, in terms of, I guess, the spin-off, the question for you is more of that domino effect again. If people are making a little bit more money, that in turn you would think would help their overall general health in a number of ways. There's spin-off there, right?
Well, we all know that the single one most important social determinant of health is wealth. So of course it's a bonus to have more income. Regrettably, even if they see a $15 minimum wage in this province, that's still just getting you to the poverty line. And the folks we see in emerged apartments on a regular basis are generally the folks with the poorest health who are coming in because they don't have a very high standard of living, can't afford much until it becomes a crisis for them. So they go without medication, they go without treatment because they can't afford to buy it. So there's a lot broader issues than the minimum wage involved here, because it's about a precarious work economy where you don't have any stability, and the minimum wage worker is basically usually wrapped up in that, although there are obviously many other people now involved in that precarious life. So yeah, it's important to move progressively upwards as it comes to improving people's incomes. But the big picture is that there's got to be a greater equality of wealth distribution.
Okay. It's something that we saw on the way out of that last segment when we were talking. We saw a couple of people who are out and about, are awesome volunteers. We're out doing streeters, talking to Londoners about election issues. One gentleman was saying how it's wonderful to see that we are making strides in social programming and different resources that are available. But he has concerns about the sustainability of that, because where is the money coming from? And so when you, mandate private business to pay more for their minimum wage workers, it is good good for those workers, but you wonder sometimes how the businesses will manage to keep up with it. And I know a lot of people who have been asked for comment locally across the province, what have you, they're concerned about that. I don't think I've heard of anyone necessarily closing up shop yet because they've had to pay more, but it is a concern for those who are trying to run their own businesses, smaller operations, and they're hoping for a better balance. Doug Ford has said that he will, if he's elected, that he would get rid of the $15 increase on January 1st, or the increase to $15, I should say. I mean, again, is that a dog whistle, or is that something that is really necessary? Do we think we should hit pause on it now that we're at 14 and let people acclimatize, as Doug Ford is saying, or should we just carry on? Thoughts, comments, queries?
Well, I could suggest that this is actually coming after a better part of a decade of these people on the lowest income echelon not having any increases.
Yeah.
The 1% were making vast increases. Hospital CEOs, annual increases of 7+%. They're the ones making $500,000 a year.
Yeah.
So the most marginalized should not have an increase of $2, $3. That's not going to help our society whatsoever. And one has to remember that Medicare was the single most egalitarian social program we ever instituted in this country. That is a true Canadian value, not keeping people in low wages. You don't cut to greatness. And that's what I keep hearing out of that right-wing agenda of you don't have money. Of course you have money. You don't have your sense of priorities right, though. That's the problem.
Well, I think there is an argument to be made, though, that the money has to come from somewhere, and with so many competing interests, like if you think of, and now I'm no economist, obviously, I use a calculator all the time. Basic math is sometimes an issue. But if you think of, small business owners who are paying into the tax base, if you have enough people who start to struggle with paying into that, and there are, again, it's so much of what we're talking about is a domino effect. It's not necessarily just the big CEOs, right? You have to think of the other people on the other end of it who are going to be the ones paying out those wages. The CEOs aren't the ones that are on the hook for paying out the minimum wage to their employees, right? So, I mean, I understand your point completely, entirely, because you never want to see people stuck in a situation where they're not able to rise out and, find themselves in better situations. But I do have sympathy for those who are, facing the minimum wage increase on the front lines as well, because I'm sure they would love to. We've heard of business owners who have said, we'd love to give our employees more, but we also have to balance our books. And I think that's where a concern is for a lot of people who maybe even aren't business owners, but they think, how do you balance the books if you're looking at your competing interests of what you have to pay for? So certainly, I 100% get where you're coming from, Peter, but I also think of that other segment of the population and how they're struggling. I think sometimes we see companies like Tim Hortons, most notably, when they were a couple of locations, certainly not all of them, but in the GTA, the original branches or franchises, I guess, of the company that were clawing back on employee breaks, and some of their benefits were changing as a result of the minimum wage. That, I think, is where people certainly start to, really have a vehement reaction to it, because that company that most of us have probably gone to almost every single day in the last little while, if we're not talking our whole lives, but that, I think, is where they start to question it more so, where it's like, okay, Tim Hortons can handle it. And even the franchisees, so much of their own money and profits go into maintaining their franchises, but still, it's a mint, any of those locations, right? So that, I think, too, is an excellent point, where you talk about the CEOs, but those big companies that are earning a big amount, and that's where people get their backs up if they've not, treated their people properly, or that's the perception that they haven't. Unless anybody has any other thoughts on that, I'm going to jump to...
I would rebut to that.
Oh, sure, go
probably,
for it, Peter. Go.
Only in this, I bet Jesse might want to jump in on that too, because I only see the critics who would come out against that generally being the ones from the well-paid associations of small business, the ones that are really paid good dollars to be the mouthpiece.
Yeah.
I don't really run into the small business person that I know complaining to me directly about that.
Okay.
And they also understand that they're part of the community, and the people that make that wage will spend their money in that community. They don't have offshore accounts.
Yeah, yeah.
to hide all that money in?
Sure, they're not going to come up in some secret document,
Exactly.
you know, where they find out other listings. Yeah.
It seems like a lot of bluster out of the fat cats again, and I don't really hear that coming from the citizenry themselves. I don't know, what do you think there, Jess?
Well, I think some, pretty reasonable business people, they've certainly felt the pressure from the increase to 14. Going from 14 to 15 is honestly easier than what they just went through going to 14.
The worst is over.
Yeah, I think in some ways they're getting used to it and they're figuring it out. And the truth is that business people all over the province are really good at figuring out problems and solving them. And I think we got to rely on their creativity and their ability to innovate even within their own services, right? Oh, there's a new constraint, they're going to figure it out. And I think that, the economy will adapt. I think rather than talking about like what not to do, I'd like to hear from people like what should we be doing, right? And I think that, connecting people to jobs that are available, making sure they have the training to do the jobs that are available, that's really important for the economy, especially in southwestern Ontario. I was just talking to a guy from LiUNA. He said they just cannot hire enough people to do all the work that is available. They're trying to get people into a whole variety of trades. These are the people who are building high-rise buildings, they're building big infrastructure projects. There's a lot of work available, but getting people with the training in, and they'll take someone with almost no training now and start training them up so that they can get employed. And these are good paying jobs.
Certainly.
These aren't minimum wage paying jobs, these are good paying jobs. And they're having a hard time finding people. So making that labor market connection and getting people interested in some of those jobs that are available, I think that's the challenge in southwestern Ontario, in London in particular, is to make those connections because there's a lot of work out there.
And I'll jump off that, Jesse, because Marcus Ryan, Councillor in Zora, his ward bumps up to mine, and so we do a lot of chatting. We have a lot of jobs in Oxford County and Middlesex County. We have manufacturing plants and companies taking out billboards, bagging people for jobs. And it's connecting because we know that London has an unemployment issue. We know you have jobs, and we have jobs out in the county, and it's how do we have that regional plan that connects that? And that's really the Southwestern Ontario region working together, because we do have those jobs, and it's just finding people to fill those jobs. And like Jesse said, they're not the minimum wage jobs, they're the good paying jobs. And just to echo Jesse again, and you as well, Peter, is that it's not the Tim Hortons or the Walmarts or the things that I'm concerned about with the minimum wage. It's the Sassy's in Thorndale and the George's restaurant and our variety store out in Thorndale that really feel the pressure of the minimum wage. But they are creative enough. They're still hiring students. They're still in business, and we still have that. We have a strong in Temp Center. We have a strong support local program, and I'm still going to keep buying my pizza at Sassy's and still buying everything I need at the variety store to support that.
Wonderful. Well, I mean, this hour has gone by so quickly. We've had a fantastic discussion, Jesse, Peter, and Kelly. We are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this.
Definitely rapid transit. I think it should be easier for everyone to get around and more affordable for everyone.
Even small stuff like transit problems or traffic problems, there's some people who are like, hey, we need to change this, and there's a lot of people who don't want to change at all. And I think that kind of opposition to each other really hinders everybody in the long run.
Having bad thoughts, Detective. I believe I've been contacted by the Mercedes killer. In the underworld, to be the king, you need to kill the king.
You can either help us take them down or go to prison.
You with me? No.
Hi, I'm Jennifer.
And I'm Hillary.
Watch Giving Back as we highlight the rock stars of our community who are giving back.
And there's lots of them, so watch us on Rogers TV.
The law states a boater must carry up-to-date charts in the largest scale available for the body of water on which they are boating. Nautical marine charts are available for all charted waterways across Canada. Mobile navigation apps can also be a good navigation aid. If you are using an app or electronic charts, it's a good idea to carry paper charts as well. They are a good backup in case of a power failure.
Salthaven really started as an idea many years ago. Today we have over 120 clinical volunteers that work 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week to help sick, injured, or orphaned wild animals, and we still can't keep caught up.
Welcome back to Newsmakers. We have been chatting with some local experts on what's going on in local chit-chat and the consciousness, I guess, of the voters here in London and the surrounding area. We've been talking about big issues, BRT, healthcare, local economy, touching on topics like minimum wage. And we have come to basically the end of our hour-long program. And to do that, we're going to end off kind of going down the line of our panelists. We'll start with Kelly. Just, what do you think is the biggest interest for your constituents out in Thames Centre, in Middlesex County in general, the more rural vote? What do you think is playing on your constituents' minds most as they head into this campaign and when they go to tick a box on their ballot or X?
Yeah, so a big issue right now going on in Thames Centre and in the rural areas is obviously high-speed rail, transportation, infrastructure investments, things like that. But I think the biggest one is just going to be the economy. Yeah. And with the Auditor General report coming out yesterday or today, I forget which one it was, but I think that's going to be the biggest one, is the spending, and the economy is going to play the biggest effect, I think.
Okay, and Peter, what are we thinking from your perspective? What's the biggest issue for Londoners as they head into this campaign?
Well, not surprisingly, it is tied to the economy. What I'm going to suggest here, of course, is our hospital situation. Obviously, because that is my field of expertise, and also as a Canadian citizen, I should be very concerned about what's happening in this very city that I live in. When we have the most overcrowded hospitals possibly in the province and in the country, then what is going on? We have to fund it properly. We have had no positive built system of measurement since the Harris era to determine what bed capacity is appropriate for a city this size. And frankly, London's not alone in this. It's every major city and even rural riding has got issues with how do we access good quality world-class healthcare, which we can absolutely afford. There's no reason for this type of cutting and irresponsible means of displaying that we should provide greater tax benefit to the extremely wealthy at the expense of all other Ontarians. It's ridiculous that a province this wealthy would have people left in the streets, hallway medicine. This kind of thing should not be happening in a very wealthy province, and certainly not in Canada. So any party that's going to come out and say that they have a plan that's going to reinvest in good quality public health care, I'd say anyone in London should be paying attention to that. And certainly I wouldn't be paying attention to anybody saying priority one is to cut and find deficiencies. That's a falsehood that we've heard for a generation. We have the capacity in the city to rebuild world-class quality healthcare, and that should be what Londoners should certainly be looking at.
Okay, and Jesse, over to you.
I would agree that healthcare is going to be an important one in the discussion, and also education. It's no surprise because both those things are core provincial responsibilities. But I think I also agree with Kelly around the economy, because we had the recession back in 2009. It hit southwestern Ontario really hard. It hit London hard. It hit the whole region very hard. And we've been slowly recovering from that. But the recovery is kind of uneven, right? So some people in London, they're doing just fine. They're doing great. Other people in London are having a really hard time getting back into the meaningful employment they had before the recession. And making sure we can connect those folks with jobs that they enjoy doing, that are paying them the money they need to have a good quality of life in the city, that is really important. And there's different ways of trying to stimulate the economy. People have different views about what government role in that should be. And I think it's going to be a pretty clear choice between government that wants to be kind of activist. They're going to do things like they're going to bring in pharmacare of one kind or another for everybody or for some people. Or a government that's going to say, the way I'm going to help low-wage people is by cutting their taxes. And my solution is I'm going to cut taxes. So, I think that's a pretty big choice between, do you want a government that thinks that the role is to be activist, You know, there's a lot of uncertainty in the economy, right? People's view about where's the future of work, where am I going to be working in even 10 years from now? A lot of things are up in the air. You know, when you think about automation of trucking, just as one example, you know, that's a huge employer. It's a major part of the economy. How long is it before those trucks are going to be automated? What happens then? I think people are really worried about that. And so I think it's going to come down to these economic considerations. People are going to look at what the various parties are offering in terms of their platforms. And I think they'll be making a choice about, is that the way we think we should be going, or should we be going this other direction? So I think in any election, there's a lot of things on the line. But in this one, I think that the economy is going to be of crucial concern.
It's interesting, and I think that in this election particularly, because the Liberals have been the government of the day for quite some time now, sometimes, and we saw it even with the municipal election in 2014, there was a big swing. And sometimes when you get to a point where you've had a certain government for so long, you think, okay, it's time to, in a word like clean house, sort of that whole mentality. So it can usher in a lot of change, but that also, I mean, a lot of change in government also means a lot of change in policy, and there can be a lot of uncertainty there. So it's interesting to see what people will that dynamic, that choice between activist versus a little bit more fiscally minded activism, if you will. You know, if you want to see cuts and efficiencies, that buzzword, versus different kinds of investment. It's going to be very interesting to see how things turn out in the next month and a half, and you know what other big stories will come out and what will be the focus of the campaign. So hopefully it is on the issues and the things that people really want to be hearing about, and of course that's on, you know, the media as well, to make sure that we ask good questions and are cutting through things. Is that something that you guys worry about, how media interacts with the campaign? Like you can say how you feel about it. You know, it's an important thing to look at those sorts of things. How do we feel it's being treated currently? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll jump in and say in the rural areas, obviously media is, you know, we don't have a daily newspaper, we don't have our own TV station, we don't have those things, so we rely on the urban areas. And so sometimes I know in rural areas we struggle to make sure that our concerns and what's important to us is heard. And so that's definitely something we look for the media, is more of a regional look at things.
Okay. Gentlemen?
I look at it this way, that commercial media especially, they like to treat it as a horse race. They want to treat it like it's democracy is nothing more than consumerism, and you just have a choice of certain things and certain flavors. Whereas this is serious. This is about what we live under, how we're going to live as a society. It's not just a contest. And unfortunately, it's always depicted as a contest, and some of the most trivial aspects of it get played to the forefront, such as what is the latest crazy statement that a president says, or what a Doug Ford says, as opposed to what are the issues and what are the actual, you know, campaign dynamics here, that this is what these parties represent. And, you know, clearly there's strong differences of opinion and values that we should be, you know, considering when we do vote.
Yeah. Jesse?
I hope that, you know, the media that's in this area, you know, adds value in the way that they can. So, you know, we have a number of people who are candidates in the various ridings locally. I think what happens sometimes in election coverage is it's all what the leaders are saying, and that's it. And you don't really get a sense. There's a lot of people running for the various parties, you know, the Green Party, the NDP, the Conservatives, and the Liberals. And who are these people? You know, what do they want to do? What's their background? You know, I think the local media, as much as they can bring those voices to the fore, I think those are the people who are running in our area. At the end of the day, they're the ones who are on the ballot. And those are the people who get voted for. So I think that would be a good contribution if we could see as much of that as possible. I think, like Kelly is saying, you know, there's not even local media in some communities. And even in London, it's been cut back to the bone. You know, it's barely staffed at this point. And I think we have very high standards for media, and I think we also need to support, through our own purchasing habits, we need to support our local media if we're going to expect them to do great work. So I hope that is what happens, that the local voices really get spotlighted, and we don't just rerun clips from press conferences from Toronto, because frankly we can see those on CBC. You know?
I think the further we get into the campaigns, we'll see more local events where you might have, you know, all candidates debates, things of that nature. So if there's one note to leave off on, which we have to do, it would be make sure that you are, you know, taking opportunities to learn about those candidates that are in your ridings, you know, and, you know, search out the information. If you're not hearing it, call somebody about it, you know, tell us what's going on in the media, because we need, it's a symbiotic relationship. If you're not listening, well, then we're in trouble, and, you know, we're doing what we can to help you. Anyway, that is it from us on Newsmakers for this special edition. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to our volunteers and our panelists. Take care.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Good morning, wife.
I just can't believe this was my life, that I get to live with you.
I made a vow to love you faithfully, forsaking all others.
Did you sleep with her?
To comfort you in times of need and to keep you safe.
How the hell are you, Anna?
For as long as we both shall live.